So, I think we can safely say that the Mega Drive is the more arcade accurate here, though obviously there is a noticeable drop in quality. The Super Nintendo, though, is its own thing. The instrumentation is completely different, often wildly so, so the tracks can sound massively different to the arcade. Personally, I prefer the Sega sound, and I say that putting aside my Sega fan bias. Arcade accuracy is king in my mind, and while sometimes the SNES music does sound great, it doesn't top the arcade original. Quite often, tracks sound like they're being played on something like a kazoo, with someone using empty ice cream cartons as drums. All in all, I do give the nod to the SNES for the sound, but only by a whisker. It's certainly not as one-sided as many will have you believe. Considering the golfing hardware, the Mega Drive port looks outstandingly close to the arcade. But how does it compare? Well, I decided to make this a four-way comparison, adding the PC Engine version as well as the Champion Edition prototype. We'll cycle through the stages and then slow it down as we discuss the details. At a higher level, SNES definitely has a colour advantage, which should have been obvious. The PC Engine port isn't far behind. Special Champion Edition comes third in colour usage, and prototype comes last. It's actually quite striking how much better the final game was to the prototype on Sega. But what Special Champion Edition has is a resolution advantage. More of the screen is visible in the Sega port than any other, so background details that are cropped in other versions are fully visible, especially at the top. The SNES version comes in second in this regard, but only because the PC Engine version has a black banner across the life bars and a border at the top. The prototype here loses out with this huge black bar at the top of the screen. So colour goes to SNES, visible screen goes to Mega Drive, but what about the detail? All versions seem to lose something. Most notably, prototype is lacking a number of elements to make the others sing. Whilst the PC Engine port is lacking all the scrolling effects. Blows are traded between the Turbo and Special Championship Edition versions. Sega has the Moving and Ryu stage, while Nintendo has Honda's Left Lantern, but also the Moving Clouds in Blanca stage. But Sega has additional NPCs in Gull stage, and a Capcom sign that changes colour in Balrogs, despite the dancers in the SNES port having different coloured bikinis like the arcade. Overall, once again, it's extremely close. The prototype comes dead last. And then the PC Engine, with its similarly cropped screen and missing scrolling and other details, in my opinion, comes third. But this is a battle between SNES and Mega Drive, between Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. And let's be honest, I can't call it. The SNES has more colour, but often looks softer, while the Mega Drive has more resolution, but looks harsher, and neither has a distinct advantage in the background detail. I saw some people claim that the Sega version has more bikes than the background of Chun-Li stage, but honestly, I can't see an advantage there. We also have to factor things like the fully animated and uncensored continued portraits in the Sega Mega Drive version as well. There's also the fully animated intro, just like the arcade. When we factor those in, the colour benefit for the SNES slowly erodes. So, we'll call this one a tie. Turbo version can match that with a code input at the start of the game. But inputting that same code on the Sega Mega Drive version gives you speed settings on Champion Edition mode, so you can play Champion rules with turbo settings. Pretty cool, right? But that's not the only addition. The Sega port has an extra group battle mode, which is actually 2 extra versus team battle settings. One is match play, where you each pick a team of Street Fighters and duke it out match by match, and whoever wins the most is the ultimate victor. But for a more traditional team battle, elimination mode is a sort of winner stays on fair that you see later on. Special Champion Edition also gives you extra options in versus mode, allowing you to turn special moves on or off for certain characters. Just like Team Battle, it's another little small thing, and altogether, they tip the scale in Sega's favour? Maybe a little. But let's go back to playing just like the arcade. The SNES has long been considered to have an advantage that its default pads have 6 buttons. But that's not the fault of the Mega Drive port. Sure, playing with the stock 3-button pad is far from ideal, since you have to press start to switch between your punches and kicks. It meant that the outlay for the Mega Drive port was a lot more back in the day, especially if you wanted 2 6-button pads. However, that's a smokescreen that detracts from the real gameplay issues. When both games are on equal footing, the Mega Drive has a trump card or two of its own. The first is slowdown. Now, I played a lot of this game when making this video, and I can confirm what others have said. The Sega version has less slowdown. However, there's almost no advantage, and it's almost imperceptible. It's certainly not as noticeable as it is in Super Street Fighter 2. We'll get to that another time. And when it occurs on the SNES, it doesn't affect gameplay in most cases. However, the second point is what is known in the community as CPS chains. So what are CPS chains? Well, CPS chains are combos derived from starting a combo with light kicks, then hitting light kick and a heavy attack when moving from a crouching to a standing position. It works as a primer for lots of combo opportunities, and there's some great videos online on the matter. This matters massively, because the Sega version of Street Fighter 2 has this gameplay feature, whereas it isn't present in the SNES version whatsoever. That's a whole library of combos inaccessible in the Super Nintendo port. Like the music, you get the feeling that the SNES game is its own thing. Not quite an arcade port, but an approximation. Yes, I know that all ports basically are approximations of the arcade, but the SNES port sounds and plays differently enough to the arcade, but in ways that seem completely unnecessary. The Sega version, meanwhile, while clearly a downgrade from the CPS original, is far closer in terms of sound and gameplay, and if you count all the extra visual content, it actually looks closer in some cases too. Because the game plays so much closer to the arcade, it's a complete knockout in the gameplay realm for Sega. Want a version of Street Fighter 2 on your 16-bit console that plays just like the arcade? Only Special Champion Edition on Sega does that. So, it's a win for the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis version. Yes, this is the Sega guide, so you may think there's some bias involved here. But honestly, I played and loved both versions while growing up. And while I have fond memories of the Super Nintendo version, it does have some glaring arcade inaccuracies that others do seem to gloss over. The Sega version, meanwhile, is as close to the arcade as you could get on a console in 1993. And despite some issues with the sound and colour, it's a startlingly arcade-accurate experience. I own, love, and regularly play all the 16-bit versions. And while the ability to play arcade-perfect versions does exist, there's still a charm in playing these ports that I simply cannot resist. At the end of the day, your preferred version comes down to what you're looking for. Do you want a clean, polished, great-looking and uniquely sounding version of Street Fighter 2? Either of the Super Nintendo versions will suit you well. If you want arcade accuracy though, Sega Mega Drive or Genesis port is the most arcade accurate in terms of gameplay and sound. It's an absolute triumph for a port onto hardware that was 5 years old at the time. For me, it's one of the greatest games to grace not only the Mega Drive, but the fighting genre and 16-bit games in general. It took 18 months from the Super Nintendo release of games on the Sega Mega Drive. The legacy of Street Fighter 2's Special Champion Edition is even greater though. It was the final breakthrough needed to break the monopoly Nintendo had over Japanese publishers. Following Konami's Turtles game the year before, Capcom was one of the biggest companies remaining. Not only that, but it solidified a long-standing partnership between Capcom and Sega. After developing their first game for the Sega hardware, Capcom would continue to develop the Sega systems and would furnish the Saturn and Dreamcast with some of the finest titles on those systems, while Sega themselves would support Capcom with hardware from the Naomi arcade board and to a lesser extent the STV arcade board to the 4MB RAM card. And this was just the beginning of Street Fighter's journey with Sega. It was a combination made in heaven, and I hope you stay tuned to the Sega guys for future chapters. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more Sega Guys content, including more episodes of the Sega Guys Fight, the Sega Guys Race, retrospectives, shorts, gameplay videos, and our fortnightly podcast. You can catch myself.
Let's find out. So, Super Street Fighter 2 is quite possibly my favorite Street Fighter game. Either that or Alpha 2. They kind of go back and forth in my mind like a seesaw. But I definitely, between those two, it's kind of a toss-up. It's really tough. I love Super Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was awesome, the first one, and I was definitely around for it. But Super wasn't until I really got into it. I really started to care about motion, figure out how the game played and patterns and all type of stuff. Super Street Fighter was just awesome. Like you had this cool little intro with Ryu. You had multiple colors for the characters. The four brand new characters were all pretty kick-ass. And then you had updated endings, the same endings from before, but they got like retouched models. So that was really awesome. It definitely was kind of like an expansion, just a better version of Street Fighter 2. It didn't show. That's why I pretty much own Street Fighter 2 in like every form. Got it on the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, PlayStation on the collection, Sega Saturn, obviously ROM, whatever you name it. But nothing compares to that first feeling when I played the game. Back when my brothers and I first rented it, we rented that game like crazy. Yes, back when we used to rent games. Probably rented Super Street Fighter 2 10 times. Like, it was pretty intense. It was lovely. Obviously the Super Nintendo version, because I'm pretty biased.
Yeah, it
One
is.
of the
It
better. It
looks like
sounds very
crap.
close to the YouTube
Come
sound.
on, it looks
Colors
bad.
are instantly better. Far more colors on the screen, the less muted, very bright. So
It's
overall,
beyond
it
me.
looks and sounds better. All right, but
How
I would
hard
argue
is to
that
make
pretty
it
much
proper?
all the Super Nintendo has on the Genesis are good things, but they're kind of more along the cosmetic side of things, right? Where the Genesis One plays just like the arcade. Like the arcade has a flow and a feel to it. The Genesis version is the closest to that version. You know, Super Nintendo is almost like it's a modified. It's almost like they just did something. They, you know what? They put our own thing in there, whatever, and you play like Street Fighter Two remix or whatever the case may be. And just trust me, when you play the arcade one, then go play the Super Nintendo version, you'll notice the difference in the way it feels, the way certain combos, just the whole overall feel of the game. Whereas the Genesis one very much feels like the arcade. You know, obviously I don't have an arcade here in my home, but thank luckily I do have that Street Fighter collection that came out on PS4 that also includes the arcade versions of those titles. And then also too got Street Fighter collection on PS1 and on the Saturn, which they're not arcade perfect, surprisingly, but they're very close to it. And I gotta say, the Genesis version is close to it. Um, and even the sound effects, as bad as they are on the Genesis, as you can hear right now, they're actually closer to the arcade. If you listen to the arcade sound effects, when you land a punch or a kick, and it has that crushing sound, right? The Genesis, you see, it attempts to mimic it, and it does actually a pretty decent job. Now, obviously, the sound quality is not as good, but it still does a decent job of mimicking that crushing blow. Whereas the Super Nintendo version is very soft. I can't even explain it. Sound. It's not close. It's
Assassin
not the same.
Fist? What's this?
Also, the Genesis One, when you beat your opponent, when the round is over, I should say. Sorry, and you go to the next round. The music continues to play. Now, yes, the music is crappy on the Genesis, but still, it usually does continue the music like the arcade version. And then just the overall flow of the combat, the timing, the frames. I feel like the Genesis One did an excellent job of actually mimicking what it felt like playing in the arcades. All this is not to say the Super Nintendo is bad. I still love it. I still cherish it. But this is just me giving my flowers and props to the Sega Genesis version, which for the longest time I was shunning.
Okay, need
Said,
to check it
heck
out.
no, put it in the fire. I never want to see it again. Um, to become a copy, I've currently upgraded, learned to love. And like I said, it's kind of tough as for now which one I think is better. And it's tough because I've always thought one was more superior, and now it's kind of like, well, they're kind of equal. They both definitely have their pros and cons, but the Genesis one, I don't know. I enjoy playing it. When I play it,
And I
for
would
the most part with
recommend
bad audio and
Street
graphics,
Fighter
I
Alpha
enjoy playing
anime
it more
version,
on the Super
like the
Nintendo, and
OAV.
I feel like I'm playing it how it's supposed to be played.
It's fucking amazing.
So yeah, this is me kind
The
of
fight
thinking
scene
out loud one day,
with the
jumping in
Chun-Li
to get into
and
this because I'm wondering if other people
Birdie.
have the same
Oh my
thought
god,
process I do.
it's
They just
great.
thought
It's
the
great.
same thing and said, you know what, the Super Nintendo one is far superior. I don't want to hear it. And if that's the case, cool.
Nobody's
But definitely, I'd say
saying
give the
about it, but
Genesis version a shot.
it's there and it's fucking sick. It's
It's good.
almost the same good as
And one
Street
more thing,
Fighter 2
if you just get past the
animated movie.
horrible soundtrack, um, I just good lord, Genesis just a lot of their games. Some games they were had nice catchy tunes like Streets of Rage or Sonic, and then some games it was just ugh, you wanted to just cut your ears out. So this is one man's tale, one man's story about how he came to love Super Nintendo on the Sega Genesis. Wonder what you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this little video. And again, I'll give you more personal stories like this as I talk about my past, Street Fighter, Capcom.
In 1991, Street Fighter 2 hit the arcades and immediately became a smash hit. Its combination of great visuals, fantastic sound, superb cast, and outstanding gameplay made it a darling with gamers and critics overnight. Not only were the fisticuffs fluid in a way that previous one-on-one fighters could only dream of, but it introduced combos, allowing players to chain moves together, which was revolutionary at the time. Street Fighter 2 was not a game.
Street Fighter 2, the legendary title that would not only help set the blueprint for all fighting games to come, but also function as a video game that is often credited with rejuvenating the entire arcade industry. At this point, calling the game iconic would be an understatement, with the impact of Street Fighter's popularity still being felt to this day. Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior, set many trends in fighters, such as the inclusion of a large playable roster of fighters, deep rich movesets, huge sprites, and of course, one-on-one fighting. But these were not the only innovations that would come from the classic, as Street Fighter 2 would set a further trend, one of which tends to cause a lot more debates. I am talking about the introduction of releasing and selling the same video game over and over and over again, with updates, tweaks and alterations. Whenever a new version of Street Fighter 2 is being released, questions have risen with regards to whether the latest edition of the game is worth the purchase, or whether a new version of the game simply exists so that Capcom can continue to milk their big fat fighting game cash cow. 26 years after Street Fighter 2's initial release, the most recent iteration of the classic fighter would raise eyebrows once again, quickly appearing to many gamers as perhaps Capcom's most unapologetic cash grab with their franchise as of yet. So, what was it about this one that makes it more shameless than what came before it? And why do so many believe that purchasing this version was stupid? Holding these thoughts in mind, let me say to you, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the story of Ultra Street Fighter 2. One Street Fighter 2 iteration too many. Yeah. To be able to understand the crazy road to Ultra Street Fighter 2, let's quickly recap the history of Street Fighter 2 updates. Just 1 year after the World Warrior's initial release, 1992 would deliver Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, a version of the game where players could play as the four boss characters of the game, along with palette swaps of previous playable fighters, allowing for mirror matches for the first time. The game would also be rebalanced, making gameplay tighter than ever. Later that same year, the game would be updated yet again with the release of Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting, a much faster version of the game featuring new moves, further rebalancing and refinement. Hyper Fighting was produced in response to Rainbow Edition, an illegal Taiwanese hack of Street Fighter 2 that was captivating players with its extreme speed. 1993 would see yet another new iteration of the game introduced, Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challenges. This version of the game was programmed to run on Capcom's shiny new Capcom System 2 arcade board and would introduce four completely new fighters. Utilizing the new hardware, this version of the game includes more sophisticated music and gameplay, with further balancing and features added. The following year of 1994 would see Street Fighter 2 re-released once again, this time as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. One of the game's main selling points was the inclusion of Akuma as a secret unlocked character, who was inspired by the virality of the Shenlong hoax. But further to this, a super meter would be introduced along with combination moves such as super combos and air combos, changing Street Fighter 2 forever. Now, these are the reiterations of a game that everyone tends to remember due to the fact that each was released at the franchise's height of popularity, which spanned between the release of the original 1991 arcade edition of the game through to the 1994 live-action movie. This was the classic Street Fighter Golden Age. Past this point, the Street Fighter Alpha series was born, the Capcom crossover games, the Street Fighter EX games, Street Fighter 3 games, and more. It seemed for now at least that Capcom had finally left their classic behind to focus on newer fighting games featuring their famous cast. still the game will continue to show up in disc compilations through this period. And in the year 2000, a matching service version of Street Fighter 2 Turbo saw release in Japan. A Dreamcast version of the now classic that allowed gamers to experience Street Fighter 2 online for the first time. Progressing slightly further into the dawn of the new millennium, the first true new iteration of Street Fighter 2 in 7 years would surface, known as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival. This was an exclusive created for Nintendo's Game Boy Advance, and a title that made a lot of sense considering that the GBA was home to many classics from the 16-bit era that had been revived and given fresh coats of paint, including new features. So this update felt right. Controls were modified to suit the Game Boy Advance's more simplistic 4-button layout, new characters artwork was added, and a range of new stages had been added to the game from both the Street Fighter Alpha and Street Fighter 3 series, all in all offering up a really quirky handheld version of an all-time great. 2 years later, in 2003, the game that just keeps coming back was returned to both home consoles and the arcade, with the release of Hyper Street Fighter 2, the Anniversary Edition. Capcom had noted in the past that many gamers had their preference with regards to which of the 5 classic iterations of the game they liked best. So, Hyper Street Fighter 2 would innovate by allowing its users to switch between characters who could be controlled like they were in a version of the player's choice. Hyper Street Fighter 2 would be the 6th arcade version of the classic, and the last video game to ever see release that utilised Capcom's now aged Capcom System 2 rules. By 2004, Capcom had begun to note that a large proportion of the general public now seemed to have fighting game fatigue, with them finding that less and less interest was being shown by consumers when it came to their new fighting game releases. When it comes to Street Fighter, the Street Fighter 3 game sold terribly, Street Fighter EX proved to be unpopular on the PS2, and Capcom Fighting Evolution seemed to be a title that everyone wanted to forget about. But strangely, while people didn't seem interested in new fighting games anymore, they noticed that somehow Street Fighter 2 was surging in popularity once more. A combination of factors which driving this. For example, the rise of retro gaming itself, and adults wanting to go back and enjoy the titles of their childhood. However, there was a further factor that would drive it as well, an online version of Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, which saw a release for Xbox 360 in 2006. With this downloadable game proving to be hugely popular, Street Fighter 2 would just simply not go away. This turn of events would of course result in Capcom seeing dollar signs and quickly making the decision that if they can't make more money from new fighting games, they're just instead producing yet another iteration of Street Fighter 2, bringing us along to one of the most important versions of Street Fighter 2 in today's town, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. This 2008 game, like the Xbox Live version of Hyper Fighting that had already proven popular, would be a downloadable only title, being made available to play on both the Xbox 360 and Sony PlayStation 3. This version of the game was pretty special really, and offered some pretty substantial changes to what players knew and loved. You see, as aside from containing a regular version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the game would include an all-new high-definition version of an all-time great, featuring graphics drawn by Udon Entertainment, the same company responsible for a huge number of amazing Street Fighter mangas. Pair this with the new arrangements of the Street Fighter 2 soundtrack that was handled by Overclocked Remix, and you get one impressive affair. The new version of Street Fighter 2 would be designed by David Serlin of Backbone Entertainment, who had pitched a redrawn version of Street Fighter 2 during the development of Capcom Classic Collection. Further to this, with the rising popularity of Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting on Xbox Live, Capcom's Senior Director of Strategic Planning and Research, Christian Svensson, revealed that fans on the company's forums had asked for a high-definition Street Fighter game an overwhelming amount of times. The game that Serlin would design would be a heavily modified version of an iteration of Street Fighter 2 we mentioned earlier, the matching service version of the game that had previously seen release on the Sega Dreamcast. Serlin would take the game and implement balance changes and correct differences between the original version of the game and the new HD mode. Laborious tasks including monitoring speed differences between the versions and the addition of the new features. As for the gameplay, its multiplayer modes include local multiplayer, player match, and ranked matches along with online tournaments. A hitbox display in training mode was also introduced to help show players how their moves connect.
Quarter-match mode was also brought in, letting players spectate and instantly join online match lobbies, replicating an arcade-like environment. Earlier I touched on the music from Overclocked Remix, who have a website for video game tribute music. They were hand-picked to handle the music by producer on the game, Ray Jimenez, who had heard their work before. Capcom's Vice President of Strategic Planning and Business Development, Christian Svensson, describes the soundtrack as impactful after guests to whom he showed a demo of the game praised the remix music before any other aspect of the demo. The game, released at a budget price point, would be lauded by many critics for what it managed to bring to the table, with many publications going as far as to call it the best all-round version of one of the most important fighting games of all time. The fact that one of the most popular video games of all time had been classily redrawn and was ready to play online at an extremely cheap price point would quickly help Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo